we have to emphasize how all of these things work together, right?
Yeah.
They're intertwined, interlinked. The idea that if you don't have a healthy view of humility, you don't have a healthy view of self-confidence, if you don't have that vulnerability to share, the struggle that you're dealing with, if you're relying too much on praise to measure whether you're doing well or not,
and praise from certain people,
people or certain spaces, that all leads to you feeling like an imposter.
What's up, family? Welcome to another episode of the Futures Here podcast. Of course, I'm Tommy Nixon. This is my man, Robert Aboides, and we're giving you all the tips on leadership to lead this next generation. And so we've been talking, this is actually part two of a series we've been talking about of internal struggles of leadership. We're talking through the 7 core areas of internal struggles of leadership. And last time we got through 3 of them.
Yeah.
And so we talked about humility, talked about self-confidence, and we talked about vulnerability. The next one, Robert, right,
yes,
is praise. So why is praise even an internal struggle?
Well, specifically, it's our relationship with praise.
Okay,
right?
Yeah.
As a leader, I think we all set out to just accomplish things. I mean, let's just be honest. As usually if you feel a calling over your life, you're like, oh, I got to do this thing. I feel God calling me to this. I feel God asking me to lead in this way. But then what happens is people start complimenting, praising you. All of a sudden, you start getting elevated because of all this praise you're getting, because of all of the success that you're having.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's really this struggle is our relationship with praise. Like, is it okay to want to have a lot of praise? Is it okay to receive a lot of praise? How do you handle it? We talked about humility not being deflection necessarily, right? It's okay to receive compliments and praise, but it's a tenuous relationship for the leader to fall in love with praise.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's interesting is praise actually is a part of us understanding that self-confidence piece. It helps to start shape. Oh, these are my giftings. Like, oh, maybe I have something. I remember being, in junior high is the first time someone said, "You're a leader." I said, okay. I didn't know what they were talking about. But that praise then continued. People kept on saying, "Hey, I think you're good at this. Hey, great job on that." And so it's an important part of helping shape who we are. But as you grow as a leader, that praise can be a dangerous space for us to really have. And I like how you say have an actual relationship with that praise.
Yeah.
And how do you receive it? And how do you allow that to either push you forward? And that's why, again, we talked about at the end of last episode, we talked about kind of nesting these things where
they work together. Yeah.
They work together. And so that humility, right, the self-confidence and the vulnerability all work towards how do you have a relationship with praise?
Yeah. And I think, if we're honest, we all love to be loved. Who doesn't love to be loved?
Yeah.
Right. And so as you're doing the work, it would be awful. Let's just be honest. It would be awful if as a leader, you're trying to build something or lead something and nobody ever told you were doing a great job. That would be hard.
And I actually, there are some cultures, some institutions where that's kind of the norm because they're so afraid of the pride thing that you never get ups. And I think that's damaging. That's not a good space to be in.
No, I think God, God did give us an ego, not that we, a self.
Yeah.
And that self does need to be cared for. And I think that healthy praise and healthy accolades are a way to care for our inner self, for us to care for each other's inner self, I should say, because self-praise is not, we'll talk about that, but that's not necessarily healthy. So I think it's important, we love attention, we love accolades, but that relationship, that fine line that when we don't experience enough praise from others, again, it goes back to this idea of maybe it leads to self-doubt, it leads to self-confidence, maybe overcompensate for humility and like, well, if no one's going to I got to do this on my own. It just creates all this unhealthy structure where you now believe that either, again, you're going to go into the Eeyore, the dark abyss of doubting yourself, or you're going to overcompensate and become narcissistic.
Yeah. And so one of the ways that I deal with praise is that when somebody says something to me, "Hey, great job," I go through this almost this algorithm in my mind. I'm like, well, who's telling me? Do I respect them, or do I think they know what they're talking about? How are they engaging with what they experience from me? How can I receive that? And how does that either help me become more who I was created to be in the gifting that God's given me, or is it not true? Because there are parts where people are like, there are certain cultures and people that are like, they'll gas you up, and
Yeah.
I can appreciate it, but I cannot buy into it. And again, that there's a tension there, because I don't want to be a jerk and just deflect everything that everybody says. No, no, that was the Lord. No, the Lord used me when I got up and spoke, when I led that meeting, when I figured this grant out, when I whatever.
Yeah.
That's true. But I'm also very weary uh, of what is it called when people give you false praise?
When they give you false
When
praise.
when it's not true, when they're gassing you up, but it's
Yeah.
not.
Isn't that just gaslighting?
I guess. I mean, yeah, it could be gaslighting, but there's another term for it. But it's not authentic.
Yeah.
They're either just trying to get on your good side, or so I'm always kind of like weeding that stuff out as well. I want authentic. Like if my best friend tells me, "Bro, you did a great job on when you got up and spoke." Well, I trust that, because he has no problem telling me, "Yeah, that wasn't very good. It didn't feel like you put your time into that." And then he'll give me some constructive criticism. And that helps me, because the praise should actually help me continue to become who I was created to be, not just keep me in the place that I'm at.
Yeah, my wife is that for me.
Yeah.
She's like, she will tell it like it is when things don't go well, but she's also very quick to, encourage me and be like, "Oh, that was really good." I think, and helps me see it actually from a different perspective. Because sometimes I do something and then there is this self doubt, or like, oh,
Yeah.
was it really good enough? Was it really what I wanted? Did it have the effect that I wanted it to? Does it have the outcomes that I wanted to? So you're questioning all of these things, and you need people in your life who are going to be like, "No, no, stay the course. Yes, that was good.
Yeah.
That was helpful."
And here's how you could
And yeah,
get better.
absolutely. Like, yeah, but that one part, she'll
Sure.
say,
Yeah.
"I don't know about the one part, the one thing you said." I'm like, "Oh, okay." So that's helpful to have that sort of what we call constructive
Yeah.
feedback or constructive criticism about something that we've done.
And you can't get better if you don't have that. And so it's really important to have the type of people around you, and to create the space and to be vulnerable in a way where people can also share those things with you, because the point isn't you getting the praise. The point is, how much more can I participate in what God's up to?
Yeah.
And that's actually really important. And I love praise can actually be a it helps to reveal your actual true character.
Yeah, it can be a drug for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, we Proverbs 27:21, right? Is that it says, I love this. It says that the crucible is for silver and the furnace is for gold, but people are tested by their praise. Now,
Mm.
what that's intended to mean is that praise can be a refining process, and it can show our strengths, our strength of our character, or it can show the weakness of our character, depending on, again, what our relationship with praise can be. So, an over reliance on praise can actually lead us to seek validation and over genuine achievement and growth. One of the things that I know in my life, I'm one of those people that probably like I'm uncomfortable with praise.
Yeah.
Just to be honest, I don't like it. I don't like when I get it, because I worry about what that relying on praise too much.
Mm.
So I've really gotten to this point in my life where what I look for is, how do I add value, right? Am I actually adding value to this thing that I'm coming to? Am I helping it grow? Am I helping develop it? And so I try to look for that as the win for me. But I've also realized this stage in my life that, hey, the praise feels nice.
Yeah.
It actually feels good. And again, I think they're like mile markers for us, that because honestly, if you're on a path where you're not getting any praise, that's a problem too.
Yeah.
You're probably doing something wrong, right? Or you're not on the right path.
Yeah.
So I think occasional mile markers that show like people are praising you for where you're going, it's an encouragement to go, okay, I'm on the right path. I think I'm doing the right thing, maybe in the right way. So I could be really, really healthy.
There have been times for me in the past where I've rejected praise because I thought I was trying to be humble.
Yeah.
And I would say one of the things that I do now really practically is when someone gives me praise, and a lot of it's around like speaking, right? Because those are easy things. Like you speak and then somebody comes up to you and there's that normal interaction. Or somebody might send me a note or an email or text. I will literally say this phrase, hey, thank you. I received that from you. And what I'm
Hmm,
saying in that is I'm receiving that you experienced something that I got to be a part of, that I did, and
it's
it,
good.
it was helpful for you.
Yeah.
I received that. That's awesome. I also recognize in that the praise goes to the Lord. I'm like, he gives me the breath to be able to speak. He's the one that gave me these gifts to begin with. So I can have that relationship with it, that vulnerability, but also that self-confidence into the humility that I'm like, well, it wasn't my gift to begin with. I was given this gift and then I shared it with you. You got something from it. Praise God for that. But I did get to be a part of it. And I
Yeah.
put the hours in to work on it and I did the work and I did the job and so it's that tension that I think is really important in that. But that praise piece is you want to be able to receive it. But here's another great rule in praise. Do not praise yourself.
Oh, yeah. Don't do that.
Yeah.
Let it come from others.
Let it come from others. And it's funny, I was laughing while you were sharing because I was thinking about we've experienced this in preaching where pastors will not like they'll almost stop preaching and if you're not giving them the feedback that they need while they're preaching.
Yeah.
And that's some of that's in our spaces, but it's weird. Like I'm not hearing it from you. And so then people are they're just gassing you up, even though you're not saying anything.
Let's
And
move on.
yeah. And so first, don't praise yourself. That's a real simple rule that you can take
What's the proverb
in
actually?
this. Yeah, well,
Right?
what's the
Proverbs
problem?
27:2 says, let someone else praise you and not your own mouth, an outsider and not your own lips.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there it is, black and white
Yes.
in scripture, right? Don't go out and you can acknowledge and accept the praise graciously, but if you're not getting it, don't demand it.
Absolutely.
And or if you're not, if you're not getting it, then don't start, talking about how great you are. Because
Yeah.
we've known leaders like that who just can't stop talking about all the things they've done.
Yeah.
And what's interesting to me, every time I meet somebody who's promoting themselves to me and
Yeah.
trying to impress me, and I can tell they're trying to impress
Yeah.
me, right? All I have to do is ask one question to know if there's any truth to that whatsoever.
What's that question?
Well, it depends on what they're sharing.
Okay.
Like
Yeah.
I've done this, I've done this, I've done this, and I'm like, ask something about that. And then you get this weird, answer where you could tell, like, oh, you didn't really do that.
Yeah.
You weren't really leading that.
You were on the team.
in the room when someone talked about the plan and you said yes to it. Okay, I get it. This happens a lot in interviews, by the way, right? We try to make ourselves look better, and I get it. There's some of that you do want to sell yourself because
There's a self-confidence piece to it.
there's a self-confidence piece, and there's also again on the humility side, there's a piece that's like, well, I can't just let people ignore or step over me or do so. I have to fight. I have to advocate for myself in some cases, and I think that's fine. I had a conversation with somebody yesterday who said that to me, like, hey, I normally I would just accept whatever you say, but I feel like I have to advocate for myself. And I said, you know what? I love that. Absolutely. I think you should advocate for yourself because I don't always see all the things that you might see, right? I might not be paying attention to the ways in which you've done great things or the ways in which you've been helpful or, those kinds of things. And so it's great for you to point it out for yourself. But that's different. I think advocating for yourself and showing them the things that you've accomplished is different from praising yourself.
Right. Like
Right.
I'm amazing.
Like, I'm amazing. Like,
this is what I did. This is the results of that.
yeah.
But there's always a purpose in it. So I think one of the takeaways too for praise is that praise isn't that's not the destination of it.
Oh,
You should receive it. It's a gift to be given and received, and that should promote into more growth. Like either I'm not getting a lot of praise, or oh, maybe this is shaping me. These are good things. I should press more into that. But you should also give that away. If you're not a person, if you demand praise all the time, but you don't ever give it,
Oh,
that's a
another
problem,
thing too. That
right?
is, yeah.
And so a couple things. One, you don't praise yourself. Two, you acknowledge and accept praise graciously. And then you also have to, you also have to redirect the praise to the team's effort and to God's provision of that. Like everything comes from the Lord, but there's a way to do it that's not like cringy and false humility. It's like, thank you so much. I received that. I worked hard on that sermon. I
Yeah.
really did pray about that. And this is what God came through with. But I received the breath from God. So it's that acknowledgement of that too. And then saying, and also the team, right? And this is when you lead it with consensus and the team put in on it. It wasn't just me, right?
Yeah.
And we've talked a lot about that on this podcast. So go check those episodes out. And then you reflect on the positive impact of the work. So it's not that it's like, yep, I'm amazing. It's that, yeah, we got to be a part of it and look what it did.
Right.
And that's an important
And
part.
it goes back to the gratitude piece
That's
that we were
right.
talking about and the self-confidence, right? And is that as you reflect on the positive impact of your work and the work that God has done through you, there's a sense of gratitude, like, oh God, thank you for letting me be part of that.
Right.
Thank you for gifting me in the way that can help people, right? Thank you for giving me that opportunity to speak into this thing or whatever.
Right.
Again, that sense of gratitude, I can't explain it because I do this quite a bit where I'm self-reflecting on the impact that I'm having, but it's only a conversation between me and God. So that I'm trying to understand, like, hey, God, thank you for this. And there's this I can't even explain it. It's a sense of overwhelming peace in that conversation that, hey, I'm on the right path.
Yeah.
And again, yes, it's great to have the accolades and the praise that goes along with that. But my life and my work is not reliant and dependent on the praise for it to keep going.
That's good. I mean, I've been struggling with that too. I've been speaking a lot and I put in the work and then I just ask God, is that what you wanted? And he'll be like, good job.
Yeah.
And that's all I need. And then I put to rest any of this, like, oh, I hope people come up to me, or I hope I get this feedback, or I hope it's like,
get invited back.
Yeah, the Lord gave me the praise that I needed. I'm confident in that. And then I get the gift of others' praise as well. All right. So next is,
oh, that's a big one.
This is a huge one because I know a lot of you struggle with this, is imposter syndrome.
Oof. Imposter syndrome.
Yeah. So this is an internal struggle for it. I know a lot of leaders with this. Now, I actually don't struggle with this one as much. But I think it's because we've been pressing into the vulnerability piece, the self-confidence piece, the humility piece. It really has helped me kind of like not feel like, dude, I am tricking everybody here. Like, I don't know what I'm doing. I just usually go, I don't know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
But I think we're going to do this. And and then I push into my giftings, get the team around. But I know a lot of leaders. This is the biggest one for them.
It is huge. And again, let me be transparent here that I think for the longest time in the early part of my career, I really struggled with this because I came from, pretty humble beginnings. My parents are not educated. I ended up going to college, being the first in my family to go to college. And then I ended up getting jobs where I was successful and I was pushed into leadership and I kept, making better and better, wages and having more authority, having more responsibility, all of this stuff, right? But I always felt like, oh, this is all going to collapse under me at some point. They're going to figure out that I'm just that little, Mexican kid from the poor neighborhood. That was just always in the back of my mind. Even into my last career, I'd sit in board meetings with high-level executives, presidents of companies and stuff. And there was always that little voice. It was like, dude, they're going to figure you out.
Oh man.
They don't look at you. They don't look at you as an equal.
Yeah.
And so I always did feel like an imposter. And so that was always a really difficult struggle for me up until I would say I actually left the corporate world. And then I think God began to do a work in me to realize that, hey, actually, you know what? You do belong here because I put you here.
Oh, yeah.
Again, not because I achieved it, but because I put you here.
When you can get over this imposter syndrome, that's where the self-confidence comes from, because you're like, yeah, every place you place your foot, like the Lord is there. He's directed you. Like, you're a gift to this space, whether they receive it or not. And I want you guys to hear that. Like, whether the space that you're in receives you as the gift, like you have to be confident that you are. And that's the struggle here. So there's this feelings of inadequacy. You're comparing yourself to others. You're looking around the room and going, man, I've had to overcome these things, or I come from this space and no one else has. And so there's that feeling of isolation. And then you isolate yourself even more, because even when you're successful, you're like, oh man, I don't know how that happened. And so if it continues to happen, they're going to figure out that I'm full of, I'm full of it, or I'm not really this person. When the reality is you are, because you got to that place. And so,
And there's feelings of like envy that come with that, and like,
mm,
oh, comparing yourself to, well, oh, these people are getting invited to these spaces and these conferences and these speaking opportunities, or they're getting invited into these networks or whatever.
yeah,
And if you're not getting invited to those, it does make you feel like, oh, maybe I'm not really all that great, you know?
which I found a lot of this has to rest on our belief around God.
Yeah.
Because it's like, well, if God got you here, won't he take you there? Like,
Yeah.
like,
Well, and also that's maybe that's not your path.
yeah, and yeah, absolutely, right? And also too, but what I found in this with people who are really struggling with this is then they shoot themselves in the foot because they are doing really great. Everybody else looks at them and going, "Dude, you're killing it. We see your gifting. You're amazing." And they're like, "No, no." And so they start making decisions based on this idea that they're an
Yeah.
imposter, and then they actually mess up or they fail, and then that what does that do? That then it just enhances that belief,
Yeah.
and then it's this ugly cycle.
And again, God, we have to emphasize how all of these things work together, right?
Yeah,
They're intertwined, interlinked. The idea that if you don't have a healthy view of humility, if you don't have a healthy view of self-confidence,
yeah,
if you don't have that vulnerability to share, the struggle that you're dealing with, if you're relying too much on praise to measure
yeah.
whether you're doing well or not,
And praise
that
from certain
and
people.
praise from certain
Yeah,
people or certain spaces, that all leads to you feeling like an imposter. Like, oh,
yeah,
maybe I'm really not who I thought I was, right? And there's this constant worry, which can get really, really bad. Um, it can be paralyzing and can lead to depression and anxiety, where you're constantly thinking, "Dude, I'm going to be found out.
yeah.
This whole thing's going to collapse because I'm not really that person that people think I am."
So a couple things, man. Just as we all wrestle with this, is to one accept that these feelings they're common.
They
That
are
you're not the
common.
only one.
I, yeah,
Like most leaders we run into struggle with this, and it's not reflecting reality to it. And that a ton, probably the people you look up to, they struggle with this as well.
absolutely,
So
absolutely.
you have to share your feelings with those trusted friends. I mean, those concentric circles that we talked about in vulnerability, and allow their perspectives to speak into you. Now, here's the big part of that: you have to receive it.
Yeah,
You have to trust them enough that what they're telling you is the truth.
right.
Receive it. That's why even when we talked about praise, I have to receive that, right? A lot of times too, one of the things you could do, keep a journal of your achievements. Like go positive feedback, go back to the milestones, the awards you
good.
have won, right? And look at that and be reminded. God did that in and through you,
Yeah.
and he can continue.
For me, one of the things that I had to really work through is negative self-talk. So
That's
I
good.
had to really bring that to God and have these conversations with God about, God, are you really, am I really supposed to be here? Are you really calling me to this?
Yeah.
And again, trying to get that affirmation from the Holy Spirit that will build my self-confidence, right? To say, no, no, yes, this is where I'm sending you. Trust me in this. Don't worry about anything else. Just be obedient.
Mm.
Take that step. I will grant you that land. I love, Gideon's story in Judges 6, right? Is the whole picture really of this imposter syndrome, right? And I love that God calls him. And here's my favorite part of the story is how God addresses Gideon not as who he is, but as who God sees him to be.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah.
And I think sometimes we try to look at the world in terms of who we are right now, and God is saying, "No, I'm trying to make you into something greater."
Yeah. I,
And
I love that.
yeah, and embracing that, I think relying again, it goes back to relying on God, having those conversations with God about, God, who am I really? Who are you calling me to be? What are the spaces you're taking me to, and all of that, so that your identity, your basically who you are in Christ is what matters more than anything else.
Yeah, and also recognize, friends, that it's you're on the evolution of becoming who you're created to be.
Yeah,
So these are the things, and this is the internal struggle and process that help you get to that place. And so you have to wrestle with this instead of reacting to this false narrative that you're an imposter,
yeah,
because you're not. And you can actually continue to move. And I love that that in the Gideon story, right, exactly what you said, that God, he looks at you as somebody that you don't even look at you as. And your
Yeah.
job is to have the God's perspective on that. And when you have that and you're wrestling with it, it actually opens all the doors to do what you were created to do.
Yeah,
And
and
so,
and it allows you to lead with a sense of peace, and I'm speaking from experience now, that when you're able to overcome this imposter syndrome and you work that through and the Holy Spirit begins to work in that, I lead with a sense of peace now,
oh yeah,
knowing that I trust God where God is leading me and what he's asking me to do.
which brings that confidence. So people are always like, man, how do you know? And you're
Yeah.
like, well, it's not because of me. I rest on this. So the next one is actually, I think, a core one that runs through. It's the thing that messes up all these other struggles,
Yeah.
and it's fear. And so it's really like it's the emotional response to either perceived threats or real threats and challenges in our life. And some of that could be that perceived threat could be that I'm an imposter, right? That
Yeah.
this is
I'm
not
gonna be
real.
found
Like,
out,
I'm
yeah.
going to be found out. So really this idea of fear is, you have the fear of failure, fear of making the wrong decisions and facing criticism. You have the fear of uncertainty about the future and outcomes. I've been struggling with this week and just going, man, my reaction, my emotional response to my wife, to my children, to our people I work with, to myself has been this last week has been based on
Mm,
fear. And I'm like, oh my gosh, and so it's that emotional response to that, which then affects holistically the way I think, my
yeah.
physical being, my emotions, my soul, my spirit, my spirit. And this it has caused that's what causes that paralysis, right?
Right.
And it also causes us to make poor decisions. So if I feel like I'm an imposter and I'm afraid of being found out, I'm going to start isolating myself, setting up barriers so no one can figure that out. When the actual answer to that is the vulnerability, which is that's what I'm
Mm,
afraid of.
yeah.
And so it's pressing into that fear and seeing that.
Sharing that with others. Yeah.
Yeah.
Leaders, we want you to hear this. We all struggle with these things.
Every single one. Yeah.
We're not sharing this as a way of saying, yeah, here's all the struggles you guys have, and here's how you need to deal with it. We're sharing it from a point of vulnerability to say that we all deal with this. Even as Tommy just shared,
Yeah.
this whole week he's been
It's been
dealing
tough.
with all these different fears, right, of potential things that can happen or threats. And so we're not saying that you aren't going to experience these things or that you shouldn't experience these things. You are going to experience these
Oh
things.
yeah, absolutely.
Jesus said, in this world, you will have trouble. That's what Jesus said. He didn't say you might, didn't say you won't. He said you will. So we know that we're going to experience these things. The question is, how do we deal with it?
Yeah.
And I think with fear specifically, we again go back to scripture and remind ourselves that, and I don't know if this number's accurate. I hear it all the time, right? Is that 365 times in scripture, God says, do not fear.
Yeah.
Like it's the most common thing that he's asking us. But he's not just saying, don't fear because there's nothing to fear. He's saying, don't fear because I am with you.
Right.
That's a big difference, right? So there may be an actual threat. There may be a possibility of failure. All of those things are true. There is uncertainty,
Yeah.
but he's saying, I want you to face them knowing that I'm with you every step of the way.
And this is where, friends, like I stand on truth because I have to wrestle with fear with truth. What is actually true? Not just my emotional response to the reality I'm sitting in or my
Yeah.
perceived threats. I have to go back. And that's where you have to do the internal work to deal with what do I actually believe is true? And I land on God's word. I land on God's character. I land on who he is. I work from that space. I don't know how you do it outside of that.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think, again, part of handling it too and relying on God's, guidance and his provision is also just from a leadership mental exercise. I think we need to reframe fear as an opportunity for growth. Like,
Yeah.
because for me, I really dug deep on some of these things. Like, what am I really
Actually
afraid of?
Yeah.
And where does that fear come from?
That's
Because
right.
a lot of times it comes from conditioning or it could come from childhood trauma, right? There's things in our past. I've been doing a huge reflection on my past this week, thinking about, wow, how is so many of these things that I've experienced, how are they actually shaping me today?
Mm.
And which ones are shaping me in a positive way and which ones have shaped me in a negative way? And so I think that reflection on why am I afraid? What is it that I'm afraid of? Why am I thinking this way? It's a great opportunity for growth.
Yeah, I think it's a core opportunity for growth. And if you're not awake to it and you don't capture it and you go, wait, one, admitting that you're afraid, that
Yeah.
there's fear there. A lot for some of us, that's like, no, I just got to grind. And we do all these other things so we don't have to deal with this. And we're saying, this is a path to healing. This is a path to better leadership. This is the path to be who you're created to be. This is a path to love people better around you. Capture why am I feeling like this emotional response? And a lot of times fear is covered by other things, anger.
Yeah.
You can go look on the feeling wheel, where are the core bait, you can go see Inside Out 2, and you can look at all these things, but a lot of times fear is actually covered by other emotions. And so if you can dig down on it, it's a path to that. And so fear,
Yeah.
I think, is a huge one. The last one is perfectionism.
This one probably is how we mask all of the other ones,
Right.
I think. Right.
It's a sense of, how do I get control?
Yes.
back?
How do I, how do I get control? It's more really, I guess, nuanced to be uh, how do I get everybody to perceive that I'm in control?
Oh, yeah, that's
Right.
good.
How is it that I can help, I can have people see me as flawless, right? As like I'm perfect, or at least everything I do, they don't need to worry, because there's this mindset where I have these high standards for myself and for others. And so when I demand that, then everybody will think, oh, this is the person to follow.
Yeah.
Like this person has it all together. They're super confident, right? They have no vulnerabilities, like all of this stuff. But really, it's just a masking exercise for us.
Absolutely. And I've seen so much, and I think, to qualify this again, too, perfectionism can look in a lot of different ways. Like, some of us already know I'm not a perfectionist, but I definitely can front, right? In my personality and my weaknesses and the things that I struggle with, I can front like with strength. So it might not, it's a perfectionism of strength. Like, I'm fine, we're good, everything's all right, we're gonna grind. And I'm just projecting this. It's all the BS that we come up with. So if you're like, well, I'm not a perfectionist, like, well, what is it? How do you react to the fear? And what are the unhealthy things that you do to project that you're fine and you're okay and you're not an imposter and you're all these things? Because it's in this perfectionist space where I see a lot of leaders front, where they try to be this thing that, I think for a lot of people it fools them, but for a lot of us, we're looking at that and going, oh, and that's where all the toxicity comes out of. That's where a lot of the bad leadership comes out of.
Yeah.
And it's a reaction to, I think, that core fear.
Well, let me again be really vulnerable here.
Yeah.
And this was a big struggle for me for so much of my life. And I've done so much work in this area, for me, realizing that I know where it comes from, right? It comes from this idea that I came here, to the US when I was a little boy, but again, poor, right? Uneducated parents, like, have nothing. And then I'm thrown into this culture of, let's be honest, just whiteness culture, right?
Yeah.
Where, oh, I'm not white, I'm not rich, I don't have an education, well, at least at the time I did, right? So I always felt less than everybody else. And so for me, I began to think, well, I can't let them see me as less than. And so I use perfectionism as a wallpaper to cover my shame. That's really, for me,
Yeah.
I can honestly say, having done the work, that's what I was doing. It wasn't that I really thought I was perfect, or really, thought everything should be perfect. It was really covering up the shame of what I felt growing up the way I did.
So because here's the hard part about knowing you and go, I hear all that and I'm sad that that was your experience. On the other side of it, it's really made you incredible because you work so hard and you're so good at so many things that's where that came from. What would that journey have looked like without the shame piece, without the fear?
Well, I don't think perfectionism would have been part of my life then.
In what negative ways, what would maybe not have happened, or would people have not have experienced from that?
Oh, well, for one thing, I think my kids wouldn't have experienced that perfectionism where I wanted them to do everything right. And when they couldn't, they did not feel comfortable coming to me and admitting that they weren't perfect.
So people weren't experiencing grace.
So they weren't experiencing grace.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great way to put it. They were not getting grace from me because I'm like, look, I'm working so hard. I know I could do it better, right? I have a high capacity, high standards,
excellence,
right? I'm willing to kill myself to work at getting to this level. And so if you didn't, I just didn't have any grace for you.
Yeah.
And that included my family, that they just were never good enough. That's a big part of our marriage story, quite honestly, between my wife and I, that my perfectionism, and again, it wasn't real. It was wallpaper covering my shame, right?
Yeah.
That I imposed so much on her that it literally almost brought us to, well, it didn't. It did bring us to the point of divorce almost.
Yeah.
Which, by the grace of God, we were able to get through that. But those are the kinds of things that, perfectionism. And again, I can go back through all of these and go, yeah, there was fear in my life. There was no vulnerability, because then that would expose me, right? I was an imposter. There are all of these things wrapped together to present myself in this perfect way so that people didn't really find out who the real me was. Where now I'm a lot more comfortable with the real me, because again, my relationship with God has really strengthened that identity for me.
Well, I mean, I see it knowing you now. I'm kind of like, but you are such a gift. So and you have all these skill sets, and there's grace there, and it's beautiful to watch you now, especially to have all these giftings, but to be able to graciously give that to everybody else without us feeling like, man, I'm dumb. I had to just call Robert in because he had to come fix my, and so I think it's a really beautiful thing. And so I think we can get there, friends, to work really hard and have excellence, but for the right reason.
Yeah.
Your reason was, I'm trying to cover up shame, which the whole time God's just going, but Rob, I already set you on this path. I've given you all the giftings. Like, shame doesn't have to be the motivator in that.
Right.
That doesn't have to be the thing that pushes us, because then what pushes that is then you're using shame with everybody else. So that all that stuff pours over. But if you can figure this piece out, then what pours over is this really beautiful, authentic space where then people also be free to become who they were created to be.
Well, and I think for me that the conversion was from perfectionism to excellence, right? I still believe in excellence.
Yeah.
But I see leaders, though, confusing those two still, calling it excellence, speaking about excellence, but really it's this perfectionism without grace.
They're wallpapering up.
It's their wallpapering, whatever they're wallpapering, and imposing it on everybody else, right? You will look at my ugly wallpaper the rest of your life.
Yeah.
I mean, again, by the grace of God, I was able to tear that wallpaper down and deal with the shame that was underneath it, to then decide, okay, what do I want that wall to look like?
So good.
And excellence for me is something that I do model my life after and everything. But again, it comes with a lot of grace.
I love that. Well, friends, I hope that's been helpful for you. Those are the 7 key areas
that we struggle, internal struggles.
Struggles for leaders. And so go check out the last episode, this episode. Make sure you drop a comment. Let us know if this was helpful to you. Give us some praise. Is basically
that's what we're asking
for. If you listen to the podcast, we were saying not to do that, but write in, because your journey through this might be helpful for another leader. Make sure you subscribe, share it, and we'll see you guys next time on The Future Is Here. Peace.